While the U.S. has come a long way on voting rights and representing democracy since the time when only white men could vote, former U.S. Attorney General Eric Holder has been working in recent years against what he's called a concerted effort underway to restrict the right to vote for so many Americans. In his new book, Our Unfinished March, A History, a Crisis, a Plan, Holder gives readers a historical perspective into how far we've come as a nation and how much further we still have to go, along with his prescriptions for reform. Mr. Holder, we thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks for having me.
We're going to delve into the book in just a moment, but first, just like to get your opinion as far as the draft that was leaked from the Supreme Court on Roe v. Wade. Of course, a central theme to the book, you talk about how democracy must reflect the will of the people. If Roe v. Wade is overturned, it would not reflect the will of the majority of people. And so where does that leave democracy?
You know, I think that's interesting. All the polls seem to indicate by almost a 2-to-1 margin that people are not in favor of Roe versus Wade being overruled. I would think that the opinion that you saw, the language that you saw, is not likely to appear in the opinion that ultimately comes from the court. That language, I think, was overwrought. It was caustic. It was unnecessary. The question will be whether or not you'll still have 5 justices, however, who will vote to overturn Roe versus Wade. If that happens, I think that's going to be a seismic thing in this country. There are going to be a substantial number of people, men as well as women, who are not going to be in favor of what the court has done. The court has ignored precedent. The justices who will vote for it are going against what they said they were going to do during their confirmation hearings. And I think that it will have an impact on the legitimacy of the court.
And you spend a lot of time in the book talking about the need for change for the Supreme Court to basically be overhauled. You'd like to see more justices added to the court. You'd like to see those lifetime term limits limited. Do you feel that these are realistic goals, given just how divided we are as a nation right now?
Yeah, I think I've laid out a pretty expansive number of things that I think we need to do in order to save our democracy, which I think is under attack. But you know what? That's what we do as Americans. We do big things. We did, you know, the New Deal, the New Frontier, the Great Society. And I think one of the failings of our society in recent years has been that we've not had this vision of looking at our society, trying to make the necessary changes. So I talk about, let's reform the Supreme Court. Let's do something with regard to the filibuster. Let's do something with regard to partisan gerrymandering. There's a whole range of things that sounds kind of almost impossible to do. But if you can't imagine doing it, if you can't imagine the possibility of success, it'll never happen. I'm actually confident that if we put our minds to it and get the American people, regular American people involved in this effort, that we can pull this off.
And I want to quote right from the book, because you talk about in 2013, the Supreme Court gutted the Voting Rights Act, opening the floodgates for suppression. That ruling will go down as one of the most flawed Supreme Court decisions in history, and it's a case to which I just so happen to be a party, Shelby County versus Holder. And you go further to talk about Chief Justice John Roberts, who said that the discrimination that made the Voting Rights Act necessary in the first place had been overcome. It was no longer necessary. And in particular, you talk about just how detrimental this was with regard to Section 5. Explain why you feel that that was so harmful.
Yeah, I think that was a very flawed opinion, the notion that the nation has changed, as Chief Justice Roberts said. And that is there's no question about that. The nation has changed. I'm a former black attorney general. That is a sign of progress. And yet we're not yet at the place where we need to be as a nation. And if you look at what happened after the Shelby County case, not months later, not weeks later, but hours later, states started to put in place these restrictive voter ID mechanisms to try to keep people away from the polls. And what started back in 2013 has only blossomed since that time. That was an extremely destructive opinion when it comes to the rights of many Americans to get to the polls and to vote in an easy way, or at least to vote in the same way that their fellow
citizens do. You started the book talking about and telling the story of Jimmy Lee Jackson.
Yeah.
Why'd you do that? Also, somebody who you mentioned his story on the 50th anniversary of the March on Selma.
Jimmy Lee Jackson is one of those people whose name is kind of forgotten to history, and yet he is a central part of this whole march towards a more fair America. He's a guy who saw, I guess back in 1962, his grandfather attempt to register to vote, was not able to. It energized him and made him a civil rights advocate. He was there in 1965 in Alabama, 3 years later, fighting for voter registration. As a result of a demonstration, he was shot, he was killed. Dr. King comes and eulogizes him in 1965, and the determination is made at that point to come up with a march from Selma to Montgomery, which led to the confrontation with John Lewis on the Edmund Pettus Bridge. And so all of these things are connected. And that's one of the things we try to do in the book, to talk about these forgotten Americans.
And with regard to voting rights, you describe this as the most urgent political struggle. Why do you feel that is?
Because the vote is the thing that controls everything else. If you care about reproductive rights, if you care about the foreign policy of this nation, if you care about gun safety, climate, all of that comes down to who serves in office, and all of that is a direct function of who gets to vote, how you get to vote, how easy it is to vote, who actually counts the votes. So, you know, voting has been and always will be something that is important to the American experiment. And we go through the book to show that there's always been a constant struggle about who will have a chance to vote. I mean, in the beginning part of this country, white men who did not have property, they were the first people to fight for voting rights. Then women fought to get voting rights, and then African Americans, then young people. Voting age was lowered to 18. We've been on an arc that until recent years has been to expand the number of people, number of categories of people who had the ability to vote. And what I'm concerned about is that in the present day, we seem to be restricting the ability of too many people to vote.
Mr. Holder, such a pleasure to have you here in studio with us. Thank you so much. Our Unfinished March, A History, a Crisis, a Plan is available tomorrow wherever books are sold.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.